And I also want to really point out that the techniques that I'm going to show you can be used with watercolor or acrylic. The painting that I'm going to do, I'm going to use acrylic paint, and I'm going to show you how acrylics work similar to watercolor until they dry. So if I'm going to use these paints with lots of water and make a very watery mixture, they're going to work similar to acrylics. The difference is once they're dry, you cannot manipulate them like you can with watercolor. So I've got my paint ready on my palette. I am using an acrylic paint for this demonstration, and the finished painting that I'm going to be doing is, I call it a loose profile, and the reason is because I haven't worked on blending the colors to create really soft edges. Instead, the colors have blended while they're wet almost by themselves. And it's a good beginning portrait because you're not it's looser, and the artist is um, encouraged to just be more comfortable with the finished portrait. So that's the finished portrait, and the way that I blend the colors, and this is more an exercise on getting your flesh tones right. So if I was going to use what I always do is I start with a base, a very light, almost transparent base coat. So I'm going to use a lot of water, and I'm going to create my beginning or my lightest flesh tone. So that's the Algerian crimson and the white. And again, I'm just making that very light beginning flesh tone. And if you can see how pink that beginning flesh tone is, if you were doing an Asian skin tone or maybe a child skin tone, you could use that as your base. But in this case, I'm going to add just that little bit of yellow, and again, like I said, that will give it that fleshy color. Okay. So it's very, very watery. So I'm going to start by applying that color all over. And this is the, again, this is the very, I'm going to do several layers. So, and I'm not trying to get it in certain places. I'm just applying it all over as my first color. And you can see the lines underneath it still. Okay, I'm going to work quickly because I want these colors to blend, and this is acrylic, so once they're dry, they're dry. Add a little bit more so that you can see it on the camera. So that's the first color. Now, where I have darker shadows, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. And the way that this works is when you have where you have your shadows, you're going to just very gently, very lightly pick up a tiny bit of this color, and you're going to add it right to these shadow areas. And I want it a little bit red. So wherever there's shadow, I'm just going to darken those areas with this. Lips are usually the same color as the skin, only you um, pinken them up or darken them up. Now, right here where I got these lips too red, I can just pick up the color. I can clean my paintbrush and just pick up the color with my brush, especially if it's watercolor. Again, if it's acrylic, you've got to work fast while it's wet, or else it's going to dry that way. And you're not going to lift it up once it's wet. So again, this is a loose portrait. So I'm going to keep working, and I'm going to work rather quickly so that I can get. This is a technique especially with watercolor. You can gently lay the color in like this. Right now, if students are working on this, they're usually a little frustrated because it doesn't look like much, but it's important for them to know that this is just the very beginning. You have to think of your portrait as stages. And this is stage 1 of this portrait. If the student gets an accurate drawing on the canvas, the portrait's going to look similar to the person that they're trying to make it look like. So they'll be happy with it. It's worth the time to really look at your beginning picture. Really look at your beginning picture, because you can see that there's a dark shadow right there on the cheek, dark shadow right up here in the top, on this side of his nose, under his nose. In other words, try to see the darkest shadows, the medium shadows, and try to see where these real bright highlights are, so that you don't put a shadow where there are none. And I usually try to, if I did a reddish tone up here, for example, I try to even it out. So I would maybe put a few reddish tones or blue tones somewhere else so that the painting isn't awkward. So every now and then I'm just wiping my brush if I feel like I have too much paint on the paintbrush. This is a good example of how, if you work quickly, you can use, if all you have is acrylic paint and you want to play around with watercolor, this is a good way to do it. So I'm just laying the paint on and letting it mix with the water that's on there. And anytime you're working with acrylics, make sure that you're keeping them moist, keep them misted so that they don't dry out. And I've got to make a little bit more of my flesh color. I'm going to darken the flesh color, the original flesh color, because I'm done with my base coat, which is the first coat.